Hi design thinkers, my name is Matthew Sear, and today I'm going to go over 5 easy tips and tricks on how you can find your assets in the design system a lot faster. We're going to be able to go through these, make it a lot quicker for you to be able to find the right icons, components, the right sections, pages, etc. So if you'd like to learn more, you'd like to improve the speed on how you can quickly access all of your assets and how others can also quickly access those as well, then you're in the right place. Sit back, relax, and let's jump into the video. All right, here we are inside of Figma. You'll be able to find the link for this project in the description box below if you'd like to follow along. Otherwise, let's get started. Sometimes when we are searching for, let's say, an asset, let's say we want to find, and we type up arrow. And there we go. I can find all of those components because they are labeled and they have the word arrow. But if I wanted to use a different word, maybe I started writing, like, for example, something like chevron, I wouldn't be able to find that asset. So to help us actually find these assets faster, what we can do is we can add keywords behind our design components. I can click on my component over here and I can go up to the top, and over here you'll be able to see there's a component configuration. And over here we have a description box. Now this is where you can put all the documentation for your component, but you can also start to list in other keywords that are maybe not what this is named, but what people might search for. For example, looking at this, it might be a tag, but it also might be a chip. And maybe we want to make sure that if a person using the design system searches chip, they'll be able to find this asset. And the way that we can also start to quickly set these up and use them is we can actually use a bit of AI, where we could actually use and just ask it to say, hey, here's a format. We want you to create some keywords that are relevant to a design system. And we also want you to be able to make sure that they support basically designers to search things faster. So let's say we use a prompt, something like this, and I was to go to my ChatGPT and I can prompt that in. And because I asked as well at the very bottom, do you understand the task? It will let me know that it understands the task. And going forward, I can simply either just take a direct screenshot of a particular asset and I can just copy and paste that in. I could even give it further details and prompts as well about that asset, or I can just leave it as is by me just sending it through that picture. It will take the picture, it'll look at the word, it understands it's a keyword, and it can come up with some relevant, reasonable tags. We can choose what we want, we can add any more to this as well to improve upon it. And in addition, if you want to do not just using AI, but if you're collaborating with the rest of your team, you can easily do a quick workshop where you can basically have a canvas with the asset, and then everyone basically gets the opportunity to put down some sticky notes and they can give them different names. And that will help you just get a good collection of names that makes sense and that you can add to the actual component. So over here, I can easily add those in, and now I'll be able to have that as an additional search term for this particular asset. There is also something else to note. So if you are looking at an individual asset, you can start to put down actual definitions and keywords here, but the difference when you're putting keywords in here, you won't be able to find them. It will only find what's in the parent. So understand that inside of variants, the documentation doesn't help you find the actual parent asset. You'll need to make sure that you add it in the top level. And when also having assets with components and grouping, Also, make sure if you want to have a couple of these as well across and you want to be able to search as well for other assets that may contain it, also make sure to add it in to the actual parent asset and adding them in the top. In addition, here you can also start to look at, for example, I've called this one and I've populated it in here, but I could actually add in, for example, I could take a screenshot of that. I could paste this in here. It will give me a couple of keywords. I can pick and choose the ones that I want and that I think are reasonable and that are good here. I can add that in to the parent asset for the top level right at the top here. And because I'm over here, I can still be able to find those keywords. So I can actually be able to then make sure if it's anything that I want populated up, I can of course add them into the top over here. And maybe I only want a couple to be found, so I use whatever I decide is relevant, which makes life a lot easier when you're searching for assets. And if I say chip, I'll be able to find this asset that has the chip in it, but I can also find the asset that has label, because these assets have label in it as well. Although they could be a chip, they could be a label and or toggle. All right, tip number 2, our icons. So we may have a whole collection of icons, and we might also, of course, want to add in all of those relevant, nice keywords underneath. That would definitely help us find those icons. But how can we have a whole page where we are looking at these icons and we want to identify them? We can add, for example, a nice, easy layout. We can, of course, create a frame that's at the top. We can call that frame icons, which means it will find the actual icon group really nice and easily. Any other group below that, we want to make sure that we keep space so the groups get ignored. So for example, I can click there, I can press enter, and I can just rename this to nothing. And I can, of course, make sure to rename those also to nothing. So it will ignore the layers and the actual sections that are holding the components. But next to these components, we have these names. So I can set up this name and make sure I can call it whatever I like, or I can also use the same name as the actual component itself, which means if I am searching up assets in a big collection of components, I can use my search to quickly look for those assets, and it can find those labels. It can direct me directly right to where those components are. And that's because in the canvas, I have these names. I actually have these sections, and I can look at those sections and find those sections. And it won't be able to do that if you just name just your component. So it's really handy to have some actual labels. Even labeling your sections will also do the same thing. It will grab the sections that have those relevant names and wording so that it can snap to where they are. But there is also some extra fun little parts that you can do with this to enrich and enhance the way that you're naming items in these sections as well. So we can, of course, not just use the name of the actual asset, but if you want, you can also write in some of the other keywords. And I can even create, for example, groupings of assets, or I can select, for example, multiple frames here And what I can do is make sure that this one will be arrows, and because that is an arrow grouping, I can be inside of assets, and I can go to my component here. I can go to that icon area, and I will have, for example, my arrow group, and I'd be able to find assets within my arrow group a lot easier. So using groupings, using the names and naming the frames that hold the assets can group those assets and make it easier to find those assets on your canvas. All right, so tip number 3. We will be going to and using our keywords, and we're also going to start to think about grouping and sections a lot more, and understanding how we can start to sort our larger and more complex assets so that we can find them even faster. Now over here, for example, I have a bunch of sections. These sections have, for example, a card. I can call these card sections. And by doing that and having the label and using my actual section asset, I can then be able to find those assets actually a lot easier, and not necessarily need to add the complexity of the name of card section into these sections. And I can simply group them and use more targeted names across all of these assets. And to top those off, I can also set up, for example, a convention of grouping names. And I can also identify some key names that will be what I can add into as an additional way of searching these assets. For example, this could be pricing, could be the actual primary targeted keyword here. But if the designers were looking for other assets here, maybe they're typing in things to do with items, or maybe they're typing in blocks, sections, elements, pages, screens, etc. All of these types of words we could use to help identify and group these assets more effectively. We could easily use ChatGPT to, for example, help us create more relevant keywords for these sections, and we can add them in here, and it will be able to give us a list of all types of words that we could explore. Maybe we call them collections, maybe they are just, we've got collections, frames, maybe we use templates, maybe we use layouts, etc. And then what we can do is we could easily add those in. So when our designer is not just, for example, looking for a specific asset, but maybe we're looking for sections, and we can be able to identify all of the sections, but then maybe we're looking for cards, and then we can identify all of those groupings that have cards, and we don't necessarily need to have them all in the namespace. We can have them inside of our keyword space, inside of the actual components themselves, so that we can define this is a section, these are elements, and we could have even a few different words that could define it. Element, section, template, page, screen, they could be in here, and they could help you quickly find specific larger components and screens and templates, making it much easier to look them up and identify those lots. That is number 3. All right, so this is number 4. Now, we have assets that are at different stages, different states, different places. We have different ways of staging them, sharing them, reviewing them. So I'd love to use some simple emojis. I love to add a couple of simple emojis to my sections so that finding or even just simply typing assets, instead of always having a name, you have to type up all the names for everything. And maybe you might want to say this one is ready, or this one is done, or this one is in review. Instead of having all of these names or words that you have to always write in any particular frame that is in different parts or different stages, you can create a simple emoji to symbolize what those are, where they are at. And by doing that, it's a lot easier. So I can actually, for example, just quickly add in any of these key emojis, and then there we go. And by basically using my search, I can also search for those, and I can find all of those that have that particular emoji label. And the best part is I haven't added the emoji label to my component. I added it to my section, and by adding it to my section, it helps me define the section without necessarily changing the name of those components or those screens. So I can use a couple of nice, easy labels. And by doing that, I could treat this as it is in review. These are the screens, they're in review. We've talked to everybody. Everyone knows about the use of these different colors and the use of these different emojis, and they can be able to define them as what they are. So when searching through your files, we can find the asset that's in review a lot easier and explore the different areas where those assets are in review, or they're done, or they are in different states, etc. So that is number 4. All right, so tip number 5, the final one. This is pages. Using your pages, grouping your components in different sections within your pages, and just using a nice convention that works for you and your team. Now, a nice simple way that you could go about it is by using a grouping kind of label and using dividers. So we can, for example, we can add a layer. I can do my underlines, I can press enter, and by doing that, I've just added this actual page that acts as a divider, and I can use these dividers, and I can use another page with a name, and I could call this actual what I want. For example, here we've called it button, and underneath button I used a nice little emoji that has like an indicator that it's inside of this section, and I'm using a convention. It's a very simple one here, but I'm using group, and then I'm using the name of the item. So button, and that's my grouping name, and then I have a default button, and then I have a link button, and then I got a favicon button all in here. And when I am searching through my assets, I'll be able to, for example, I can see there's the favicon one, I can see there is my default button. I can actually see those buttons here, and I can easily see where I've come from. I know where I'm at, and by labeling it this way means that we just have a lot more easier way to navigate through our sections and finding our assets within those sections. So if I was searching at the top here and I typed up button, it will be able to find all of those groupings that are inside a button. It will also, of course, find everything that is as well with the labels of button itself. Other ways that you can also enhance this is by also using, for example, a couple of actual either prefixes or suffixes. For example, if I wanted to here, let's use a actual suffix. I would call them CP for my component maybe. And if I was to add the CP at the bottom as the suffix in here, what that can do means that I could also use that search term And if I use CP, I can just find the groupings that are inside of all of the actual CP assets here. So a nice quick way to use a couple of easy acronyms as either a prefix or a suffix inside your pages to quickly group things, find the exact assets you have, and by having shorter actual asset names, it's a lot easier for you to read it, identify it, and that means you're not having a sprawling long name that you need to do. So overall, we've managed to cover ways of adding in keywords into components. We've added those keywords to enrich the components and using a bit of AI to even make it easier for us to quickly create those keywords. We've understood how we can use sections around our assets and how we can use names to define those sections. We've also been able to identify how we could even write in words in our sections to help us navigate and find our way around. And we could use a lot more words and even add in a lot of keywords into our actual sections to enrich them further with the ability for us to allow people to navigate around and find our assets. And then finally, we've also learned ways to enrich the searching inside of our groupings, inside of our pages, so that we can quickly identify and find our assets. So we're not just limited to just naming our components, but the ways that we add in all of these key points of information will help us find them, understand them, document them a lot easier, and make using a design system so much more practical. So I hope that some of this has helped you, and please let me know in the description box below what you do in your design system and what you found has been helpful in this video. And until next time, design thinkers, keep thinking, keep building, and keep creating amazing things. And I'll see you all in the next video. All right, bye.